Hello friends, it's Kristie Marcotte. In today's video, I'll be using Scrapbook.com's brand new Willow Lane bundle. I'll be making several Halloween cards using a variety of Scrapbook.com products. Here are the three main items I'll be using. This is Scrapbook.com's brand new Willow Lane pattern paper. I have the A2 size, but it's also available in 6x8. Both sizes of the paper pads include 40 sheets, and there are 5 sheets of each pattern. I love having 5 sheets, and sometimes it's hard to make the decision which side of the paper I want to use. I'll flip through the paper pad quickly so you can get an idea of what's included. Scrapbook.com's pattern paper pads are always beautiful, and I really love the unique design of this Halloween collection. If you don't make Halloween cards, there are still lots of different designs that will be perfect to use year-round. Throughout the paper pad, on the back side of the Halloween design, there's a non-Halloween design. So here's the pumpkins. On the back side, it has jack-o'-lanterns, and you could use the pumpkins for fall cards. This design is really fun with all the different pumpkin houses, and it coordinates with their brand new pumpkin house die set, and I will show you that here in just a moment. So there's a look at the brand new Willow Lane pattern paper pad from Scrapbook.com. The next item that's also brand new is the pumpkin house die set. And look at all the dies included. There's a total of 26 dies. And it even has a little border piece that you could use to create a hillside. I'll open up the paper pad again to that pumpkin house pattern paper design. On the back side of the die set, there's a sample of what you could create using all the different dies. The set includes the pumpkin house, there's a tree, moon, star, 2 different ghosts, a little bat, which is one of my favorites, a pumpkin, and several other fun images. I have another brand new die set from Scrapbook.com. This one's called Spider Webs. There's a spider web that goes in the corner, a full spider web you can put on the front of your card, also the spider image, and a couple tiny eyes. And I don't think this spider is too creepy. It even has a sweet little smile. So let's go ahead and get started with card number 1. I have 5 different cards to share with you. I will be using a card sketch for inspiration. This first sketch is from Sugar Pea Designs. It's Sugar Sketch number 24. For the solid cardstock colors, I'll be using an assortment of smooth cardstock paper pads from Scrapbook.com. On this bluish green strip, decided to add a little more detail using some of Scrapbook.com's RUB-ONS. I have the lights and lantern set. I'll use a pair of scissors and trim off that first string of lights, and I'm adding it along the top of this bluish green strip. I kept the backer of the rub-on and I'm putting it underneath. I'm only adding the lights on this strip, so I'm trying to get as many as possible from this one row of lights. I'm only able to get 2 on this piece, so I'll cut out another string of lights. And I'm alternating the different angles. So it'll look like there are lights wrapped around this bluish green piece. I'll be using some rub-ons later on and showing a different technique on how you can transfer the image. But for this card, I'm using the popsicle stick that's included in the rub-on pack. Whenever you're using rub-ons, just make sure to slowly pull back on that top piece to make sure all of the image has completely transferred. After adding the 4 rows of lights, I'll be putting this strip on the left side of the striped paper. I'm using Scrapbook.com's Deluxe Adhesive Roller. Then I'll layer the background piece on some brown cardstock. And the brown cardstock color is from the Harvest Smooth Paper Pad. Now I'll put more adhesive on the back and add my card front onto a card base. All of my cards in this video are American Standard A2 size, 4¼ inches by 5½ inches. I'll set aside the card and start working on the pumpkin house. And I've already gone ahead and die cut out all of the different pieces. I have them stored in one of Scrapbook.com's stack and sort trays. This is the smaller size. For the bottom piece of the pumpkin house, I have some white cardstock, but I don't really want it to be white, so I'm using some ink to add a little bit of color along the edges. I used Distress Oxide Pumice Stone ink color and Scrapbook.com's small blending brush. I did the ink blending on one of Scrapbook.com's Silicone Grip mats. This was originally a 12 by 12 size that I simply cut down. It works great for doing a little bit of ink blending and gluing all my die cut pieces. That way I don't make a huge mess on my workspace mat. The pumpkin house die set includes a background piece for the pumpkin house, and I cut it out of a dark gray cardstock color. This gray color is part of Scrapbook.com's Christmas Smooth Paper Pad. For the top of the pumpkin house, I used some of the pattern paper from the Willow collection. For the top of the chimney, I used a lighter gray cardstock color. This is also part of the Christmas Smooth Paper Pad. And for the stem on top of the pumpkin, I'm using some glitter paper. This is from Scrapbook.com's Mixed Metals Glitter Paper Pad. It's super sparkly and I love that it doesn't make a glittery mess. For the door and the window frame, I use the wood grain pattern paper from the Willow paper collection. The light yellow for the 3 windows, I think this is a color from the Harvest Smooth Paper Pad. I will have everything linked in the description box below. The black cardstock I used for the 3 window panes and the doorknob was from a small scrap piece in my stash. For the tiny little doorknob piece, I'll add a small drop of Artis glue, and I'll pick it up using the wax tip end of Scrapbook.com's Craft Pro Pick tool. Then I'll press it in place. And any of that glue that does show around those die cuts will dry clear. I also cut out a large stitch circle die cut, and I used some white pearlescent cardstock for the circle. I'll glue the circle die cut down first, adhering it a little more on the right side of the card. For the pumpkin house, I will be popping it up using foam dimension. I have Scrapbook.com's small and large foam squares, both in the 1mm thickness. I love this foam. It adds a little bit of dimension without a lot of bulk. Although if you like more dimension, it is available in a 2mm and also a 3mm thickness. I'll remove the release paper, adhere the pumpkin house inside the circle die cut. For a sentiment, I've already stamped and cut out Happy Halloween. And this sentiment is included on Scrapbook.com's Trick or Treat stamp set, and there are also coordinating dies. Before I adhere the sentiment, I'm adding 3 of the bat images. I love these bats, and you will see them on, I think, 3 of my cards. I'll put glue behind just the body and the ears. Put 2 of them on the right side of the card above the pumpkin house and 1 in the upper left-hand corner. So now I can lift up those wings so it gives it more of a dimensional look. Next, I'll add the sentiment. The very right side of the sentiment will sit on the circle die cut. So before adhering it down, I'll add a scrap piece of cardstock behind the rest of the sentiment. Put Artis glue on the back and adhere it in the lower left-hand corner. So there is my finished card, and this is card number 1. This pumpkin house is so fun. For card number 2, the card sketch is from Sketch Saturday. This is number 750. I'm using the ghost pattern paper for the background, layered it on some black cardstock, And I cut the ghost pattern paper to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches, so that background layer is an additional 1/4 of an inch. Now on the card sketch, it has 5 small hexagon images. I'm switching it up and using Scrapbook.com's brand new Octagon die set. The Octagon dies are one of the sets I'll be using in my upcoming SBC Fest class next month. And I use 2 different sizes of the Octagons. 2 of them are slightly larger, and then the other 3 are one of the smaller Octagon sizes. I'm adding the sentiment Boo, and this sentiment is part of Scrapbook.com's Ghost die set. I use some glossy black cardstock for the word Boo, and the outline piece I use some vellum. Put artiste glue on the back of the sentiment and adhere it on the vellum layer. And while I wait for the glue to dry, I'll place an acrylic block on top for some added weight. I'll be adding 2 of the ghost images, and these are on the Pumpkin House die set. Putting just that little bit of ink along the edge. I'm using the same pumice stone ink color I used on the previous card. For this small rectangle piece, using more pattern paper from the Willow Lane paper collection, and I'll layer it on some black cardstock. Before adhering it down, I'll first add the 5 octagons. I'll start with the larger orange octagon that'll be on the right side above the sentiment box. Put artiste glue on the back, and I'm not pushing it down yet since I'll be tucking one of the smaller octagons behind it. I'll lay the sentiment box on the card, still not adhering it down, and I'll figure out placement for the final 3 octagons. Since all 3 of those will layer on top of each other, I'm adding artiste glue, just not pressing them down completely. That way I can still lift them up and tuck the other octagons underneath. Once those are all in place, I'll put glue on the back of the sentiment box and adhere it on the center of the card. I thought about popping up the sentiment box, but decided to glue it down flat. Instead, I'll pop up the 2 ghosts. Now I'll add the sentiment Boo, and I'm putting it on the left side of the sentiment box. Put artiste glue on the back, and I'm trying to be very careful to only add it behind the Boo die cut piece, since I don't want any of the glue to show through on the vellum. For the 2 ghosts, I will be popping them up using the small foam squares. Put the larger ghost on the right side of the sentiment Boo and the smaller ghost underneath the sentiment. Then for a final finishing touch, adding some more of those bats that I love. This time I cut them out from some black glitter paper from Scrapbook.com. I'll add 2 bats on the upper 2 octagons, just putting them on the right and left side. So you'll see part of their wing going off of the octagon. Then I'll put the final bat on the lowest octagon. Now moving on to card number 3. Selected this fun pattern paper and I cut it out using a stitched rectangle die from Paper Rose Studio. I'll be adding a black splatter on the background using Scrapbook.com's Black Luster Brush Marker. I'll squeeze out a little bit of the ink on an acrylic block, spritz it with water, then I'll gently tap a paintbrush over the background, creating this fun black splatter. Now I'll set that aside and let it dry completely. Start working on the sentiment. I'll be doing some heat embossing. I'm adding this sentiment, Happy Spooky Season. And this sentiment is part of Scrapbook.com's Spooky Stamp Set. Using some of the black pattern paper from the Willow Lane collection, I'll first treat the paper using some anti-static powder by Pink & Main. The ink color I'm using is Honeybee Stamp's Brilliant White, and I'm using white ink since I'm also using white embossing powder. This white ink is a pigment ink, so it does take a little bit longer to dry, makes it perfect for heat embossing. I'll heat set the sentiment using my Wow heat tool. Then once it's cool, I'll cut out the sentiment using the coordinating die. And I'll hold the die in place using some mint tape from scrapbook.com. Now, I didn't get a very solid looking impression for the sentiment, especially on the word spooky, but I think the speckly look of the word spooky really works well with the card. Matches that black splatter background. Now that the black splatter is all dry, I'll layer this piece on some black cardstock, put adhesive on the back, and add my card front onto a card base, leaving 1/8 of an inch of the white card base showing. This card will feature dies from the new Spider Webs die set. I'm using the larger size spider web, and I cut it out from some silver holographic paper, and this is part of scrapbook.com's holographic mirror paper pad. It's one of my favorites. I'll hold the spider web using a pair of reverse tweezers, put Artis glue on the back, and adhere the spider web on the background more toward the top since I want to leave enough space at the bottom for the sentiment. I'll make sure to get good coverage on the back, not getting glue on every single bit, but making sure to really get those outside edges. Then I'll place a large acrylic block on top for some added weight while the glue dries. I love the look of this sparkly spider web. Next, I'll add the sentiment underneath the spider web, put glue on the back, and adhere it in place. For the spider, I cut it out of black cardstock, and I actually cut out 3 of the spiders and glued them all together. Instead of popping it up with foam dimension, I'm adding that little extra dimension with the extra cardstock layers. It would be really hard to add foam dimension behind the legs, so by having the 2 extra cardstock layers, it adds more stability to the spider. For the spider's eyes, I use some of the white pearlescent cardstock from Spellbinders, and these are really tiny. After adhering the eyes, I'll put glue on the back and add the spider on the web. So there is my finished card, and this is card number 3. Now moving on to card number 4. I selected 2 of the pattern papers from the Willow Lane collection. The orange distress pattern paper I'm adding at the bottom, and the pumpkin house pattern paper, I'm putting that panel at the top. I'm adding both of those pieces on some light gray cardstock, and this is the color from the Christmas Smooth paper pad. Then I'll layer the background piece on some of the wood grain pattern paper from the Willow Lane collection. To cover up that narrow gap and to add some separation between the 2 pattern papers, I'm adding a narrow strip of the same wood grain paper. And I did put some double-sided adhesive tape on the back of that narrow strip. Using scrapbook.com's nested oval die set, I cut out 2 ovals, one from white pearlescent cardstock and the other one from vellum. For the image inside the oval, I'm using a new RUB-ONS set. This is called Willow Lane, so it coordinates beautifully with the Willow Lane pattern paper. I selected one of the trick-or-treat images, and instead of using the popsicle stick to transfer the image, I'll be using my Platinum Scout die cut machine. I have the rose quartz color, which is an exclusive color to scrapbook.com. So if you weren't aware, you can use your die cut machine to transfer rub-on images. For the plates, I use the same as if I'm die cutting, but I'm not using any dies. So I have the A, B, and C acrylic plate, and instead of using the second acrylic plate, I'm using the brand new Magic Mat from scrapbook.com that fits perfectly with the Platinum Scout machine. I ran it through the machine 3 times to get nice pressure, then very carefully I peeled up the backer, and you can see it transferred the rub-on image perfectly. Now I'll layer the white oval die cut on the vellum layer, put glue on the back and adhere those 2 pieces together. But before adhering the oval with the image on the card, I'll first add the sentiment. I will place the oval on the card so I can figure out how much space I have at the bottom. Already cut out Happy Halloween, and this sentiment die is included on scrapbook.com's Ghost die set. There's also an outline for the word happy and Halloween, but I'm just using the words. I cut them out from black cardstock, so there's plenty of contrast to stand out against that orange background piece. Put glue on the back and adhere the sentiment at the bottom of the card. The sentiment has a little wonky font, so it doesn't need to be perfectly straight. Now I'll add the oval with the trick or treat image. I will be popping it up using more foam dimension, using the large foam squares in the 1mm thickness. I'll make sure to get good coverage on the back, remove the release paper, and add the oval above the Happy Halloween sentiment. For a final finishing touch, I have a small scrap piece of pattern paper with the wood grain design. I'll first cut a fishtail on the bottom, cut the right side in slightly at an angle, flip it over and do the same thing on the other side. Then I'll put Artis glue on the back and adhere it in the upper left-hand corner. Now moving on to my final card, number 5. We'll be playing with the pumpkin house die cut images and creating a fun nighttime scene. For the background of my card, using this fun star pattern paper, and I've already attached it to a card base. I used a little border hillside die to cut out that bottom piece, sort of a greenish gray pattern paper. I used some solid green smooth cardstock for the 3 bushes, and I did add a little extra color since this is a nighttime scene. I used Distress Oxide Scorched Timber ink. And I'll also add some of that same ink color along the edge of the star background. I'm not making it a super dark background, but I do want to darken up those edges just a little bit. Now I'll put adhesive on the back of the little hillside and adhere it at the bottom of the card. And I didn't put adhesive at the very top of that hillside since I want enough space to tuck in a couple of the die cut pieces. I'll put one of the bushes behind the hillside. Then I'll add one of the trees on the right side, also tucking just the bottom of the trunk behind that hill. And I used the wood grain pattern paper from the Willow Lane collection for both of the trees. Next, I'll add one of the bushes on the right side, this time in front. Now I'll add the second tree, adhere it on the left side of the card, slightly lower. And I'm using Artis glue to adhere most of the die cut pieces down. Next, I'll add the final bush, putting it on the left side of the one bush that's behind the little hill. Use some light yellow cardstock for the moon, and I'll adhere it in the upper left-hand corner. I've already stamped and cut out the sentiment Ghostly Greetings. I stamped it on some of the light gray cardstock, and I'll adhere the sentiment in the upper right-hand corner. Now for a little more pop of color, since most of it is very muted, I'm adding 2 orange pumpkins in the lower right-hand corner. I use pattern paper for the pumpkins and also the wood grain pattern paper for the pumpkin stems. I'll also be adding some bats and ghosts. I've already put that little bit of color along the edge of the ghost. I know it doesn't show up a lot, but they are ghosts after all. I will be popping up the ghost using some more thin foam dimension, the small foam squares. I cut out 4 ghosts, but I ended up only adding 3. Putting the larger ghost in the lower left-hand corner. One of the smaller ghosts on the left side of the pumpkins. I have 5 of the bats, and I use some of the pattern paper for the bats. Putting Artis glue just behind the body and the ears. I'll put 1 bat flying up by the moon. 2 more bats below. I'll add 1 bat on the right side in the tree, and the final bat will be above that very right side bush. I'll also add the 1 ghost underneath the sentiment on the right side. For final finishing touch, just giving the moon a little bit of sparkle using Scrapbook.com's clear glitter brush marker. So there is my finished card. I love how this one turned out. So fun to create a little night scene for Halloween. Now here's another look at the 5 cards I made using Scrapbook.com's brand new Willow Lane pattern paper. Also use the Pumpkin House die set and the Spider Webs die set, along with several other Halloween products from Scrapbook.com. If you are interested in any of the products I used in this video, I do have links in the description box below. Scrapbook.com always has fun and amazing deals and freebies, and I do have a link in the description box if you want to check out the current deals. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.